Hi, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Reverend MeeLing, Reverend Susan MeeLing, Lady MeeLing, Lady Dori, Belle. I've been known by a few names. So, I'm in Utah still after having dropped off the first of the biggest pieces that I completed of my Medal of Honor art project. And that was in Price, Utah, at an American Legion or a VFW. And I think it was a VFW, or Veterans of Foreign War. And so, whatchamacallit, in regards to scuba diving, there's a few different aspects which I took very seriously when it came to my training. When it came to my scuba diving training, first and foremost was paying attention in class and making sure to understand and comprehend what it was that was needing to be done to remain safe for each descent, safe during each scuba dive, and safe during each ascent. And never once, when scuba diving, training for scuba, as far as before going into the ocean, or anything of that sort of aspect, did I ever think that people would falsify information. So, for example, on different searches that I've looked, I've seen pictures which have photoshopping done. The reason why I can tell is because of the waves in the water in comparison to the flags, and then the way the flags are altered and stuff like that. And not only that, but, you know, in reference to common sense. So, for example, if you've read any articles or watched any documentaries, more importantly, listened to the documentaries in reference to places, for example, like the Titanic, where it's been sunk because of what happened there. There's never been any documentary or official writings in reference to scuba divers who went out there. There are pictures that have photoshopped images of scuba divers in the vicinity. However, all of the documentary aspects, articles, so on and so forth, only have remote control cameras that deploy from a submarine ship area. Now, for me, at the time of doing my training for scuba diving, well before going into the ocean for scuba diving, I had looked at some of that back then. Thought that was weird because I couldn't find any news articles that referenced that. Nor could I find any books in reference to any scuba divers with certifications that would prove something like that. So I kind of chalked it up to, well, that's weird. Why would there be pictures, but there's no name of the scuba diver, there's no what is your certification background, none of that. Albeit, I admit, in the beginning of looking at stuff like that, and well into 2019, it was just one of those, well, that's weird. That's odd. You know, most people, if they were to go scuba diving at the Titanic, I mean, that's a historical scuba dive, right? That's huge. Nobody posted their own pictures. Nobody had a story to tell. I have not met any scuba divers over the years who would not jump at the chance to talk about something like that, especially the Titanic, so well known. I mean, seriously, it's a little weird. So, you know, I've discussed in regards to not just my scuba dive at the USS or USNS Vandenberg. Not only discussed that, I also posted pictures with explanations on different social media accounts of mine, as well as not just with scuba divers, but certain civilians that have known. And when I say civilians in that regard, there are people who don't scuba dive or didn't scuba dive when I knew them, but were into marine biology. Not necessarily a part of the military or the government, however, discussed that as far as my scuba dive, specifically at the Vandenberg, but also in reference to Cozumel and Boca Raton. And there is not anybody that I've known that's a scuba diver, whether in the recreational or professional area, that hasn't ever talked about their more memorable dives in whatever capacity, whether it was they were teachers and they were discussing certain aspects and something occurred, or they went somewhere and, you know, for example, when the lionfish wound up really becoming an issue, there is one of my instructors for scuba diving, she had told me how she had learned how to catch lionfish, even though she was mainly there for a fun dive, because of being able to assist the environment of the ocean. You know, she and the group that she went with, you know, wound up catching the lionfish and doing what was needed. And so, not the only scuba diver who has discussed stuff like that. Same thing when it comes to those who have done pictures. Now, I do admit, when I got into scuba diving in 2009, there were very few people I knew who did a lot of photography when it came to scuba diving. You know, I knew people who were professional underwater photographers. I had, you know, my scuba dive buddy when I went to the Boca Raton area. He had been a professional professional underwater scuba photographer, to be specific. And even some of the individuals when I was scuba diving in Cozumel and the like, in reference to the Vandenberg, but even in lakes and quarries in the state of Texas. You know, maybe they weren't professional in regards to certain regards, but they still took their underwater photography and underwater videography extremely seriously. And so, you know, discussed that sort of stuff. And so in looking online, and, you know, I admit it's been a while. It took a while for me to kind of put that together. That probably has to do with my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 After Effects, but that is what it is. I have never found any books or articles or anything of the like that had discussed that in reference to the Titanic, with the exception of the deployed underwater cameras from a submarine. I would think that if there was a scuba diver or multiple scuba divers who had safely descended and safely ascended from a scuba dive to the Titanic, you know, that would be discussed. There would be at least one article with verifying aspects. And if that just so happens to happen just after this YouTube video, that's another issue. Today is the 14th of June, 2020, by the way. And so the reason why that's an issue is because that creates a false perception about scuba diving. Now, I cannot be the only person who has gotten into scuba diving and paid attention to the safety aspects. And so to perpetuate that sort of stuff wrongly gives individuals who are interested in scuba diving the wrong impression. Not only does it show a perpetuation of people who think that scuba divers are reckless and don't care about safety, not only does it perpetuate that aspect wrongly, but it also gives the false impression to people that think that that is attainable without actual explanations. And while I could be inaccurate, and maybe there has never been anybody who saw those photoshopped scuba dive pictures at the Titanic and never once got into scuba diving. I could be completely inaccurate, and that has never been an issue. However, if it was, there is a problem, especially if there was injuries because of. Now, I went scuba diving not because of seeing those pictures. I had done research and found out that there were ways that scuba diving assists headaches, and that was through a Hebrew or a Jewish medicine journal, and I researched further and continued on. Oh, I'm in Colorado now. But I had continued looking at different things to make sure that I was doing it safely. I chose to go through the program that I chose to go through for safety, not because of an influence from somebody else, beyond the medical aspects for my benefit. But it wasn't because I saw somebody else doing that and then, what's the big deal? In that, I have posted about my scuba dive in very specific, as far as landing at the bottom of the ocean near the Vandenberg. I've discussed it, as I said. Recently, in 2020, I put a trilogy of books together in reference to that, and discussing all of the safety aspects that I put myself through before ever going into the oceanic waters for scuba diving. Because it would be hypocritical to say something about photoshopped pictures of scuba divers at the Vandenberg, which would mean that more than one person was able to do that. Obviously, with it being in the Matthias abyss, that's perpetuating a problem, similarly to the pictures of photoshopping in regards to scuba divers at the Titanic. Now, I have taken pictures of the vicinities that I had been in, and I did not Photoshop any of the pictures I took. I also did not have a really expensive Uber type of scuba dive camera, underwater camera. The C Pro scuba dive camera that I had a maximum zoom of 10 millimeters. I am not tech savvy, especially after waking up from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, and my memory deficits and cognitive disorders on top of my headaches and migraines. In specific, the memory deficits and cognitive disorders, all the stuff that I knew before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, having grown up going to a school where we were introduced to Apple computers. It was either first or second grade, and then my biological mother did information technology, and I learned how to use not just her work computer when she didn't want to do certain things, but I didn't touch it without the permission, but I also learned how to work on an IBM DOS, for those who know techie stuff. Well, that sort of stuff is no longer the way it was before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. And so I don't have the abilities, not necessarily Photoshop. I don't know if that was around before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. However, what I was capable of doing when it came to technology before my head injury, I could do some things. I'll just leave it at that. However, I also didn't go into locations that I wasn't supposed to go into. Made sure to stay within certain limits in that regard that I put on myself, not by anybody telling me that. Just my own thing. Anyway. In that reference to my pictures that I've taken over the years, and not just scuba diving pictures, but mainly in reference to scuba diving pictures, I have not altered the pictures. Once I took the pictures, that was it. I did invert a couple of pictures, colors, but that's it. That's not photoshopping at all, whatsoever. And so in regards to scuba diving, though, the only thing I had done was use zoom, or to zoom in or zoom out. And again, the C Pro camera that I had only had a maximum digital zoom of 10 millimeters. So it had an optical zoom of 4 millimeters, but a digital zoom maximum of 10 millimeters. So all of the pictures that I took, not as selfies, but took of the areas that I was at, that lets those who are into photography specifically, but those who know how to research that sort of stuff, to understand at minimum how close I was when taking the pictures that I took when scuba diving. And so in that regard, I wonder if there were a bunch of people who have seen the images of scuba divers photoshopped in the Titanic area when, I mean, again, with common sense, if scuba divers, which in the pictures are single tank, standard issue scuba tanks on their BCDs. They're not tech tanks. They're not trimix tanks. They're not rebreathers. They're the tanks, and they're not even nitrox tanks either. They are the standard issue open water version of scuba tanks, which those who have got their open water certification know you can't go past 130 feet with those particular tanks. Ish. I mean, they do have the ability to go a little bit deeper in certain regards if you know what you're doing. However, it's not really recommended for obvious reasons. So, that being said, for it to be single tank, standard issue, no specialty gear for scuba diving, for just anybody, I wonder how many people saw those pictures and then got into scuba diving because they thought they could go there and couldn't. And then whether or not they stayed in scuba diving when they found out that was impossible for the average individual. Not forgetting another common sense aspect in reference to the fact that it has only been submarines that have been able to deploy cameras to take those pictures of the Titanic. And that common sense aspect. On top of another common sense aspect in reference of it being in the Atlantic area of the ocean, which it is deep. It's not near the continental shelf of either England or the United States of America. So common sense there on depth. And I mean, not to come across rude, just pointing out the fact that that sort of visual gives a false representation of scuba diving. And realistically, absolutely unsafe. Those who I spoke about my Vandenberg scuba dive with in specific, where I landed at the bottom of the ocean and surfaced, each of them knew that I had gone through a whole bunch of training. They might not have known unless they were instructors of mine or had been a part of the school that I went through about how many certifications I had in specific. However, even recreational divers, I had flat out said, I didn't allow myself to go scuba diving in the ocean until I had a minimum of 73 scuba dives in lakes and quarries, hot springs, to make sure I knew my gear before going in the ocean for my first ocean dive, which was in Cozumel. So I never perpetuated any false representation in that regard. I didn't set anybody up for failure in that reference. And so, just wondering if that is something to pay attention to, because scuba divers already get, I mean, you have a few different views. You have people who view that are like, I would never go in the ocean, no. And then you have people who think, you know, that's just reckless. Then you have people who think, well, that's pretty cool for you, not necessarily for me. And then you have people who are genuinely interested and then want to get into it, but then you have the different aspects in that regard as well. And so to give that impression that you could go and just drop down and go to the Titanic, really? That's not considered dangerous? Same thing when it comes to the Vandenberg. Because when I've discussed the Vandenberg scuba dive where I landed at the bottom of the ocean, again, I had discussed my training beforehand. First and foremost. Second, it was just me. And I discussed that aspect of the assigned scuba dive buddy. It was also a nitrox tank and not a standard issue tank the way the images are. And in reference to where I actually landed, I didn't take any pictures of me on the deck or actually scuba diving near the deck because of the silt that had already formed. Anybody who knows anything about scuba diving knows that as soon as silt forms and you get too close to it, even a slight flick of your fin can cause a big cloud if you don't know what you're doing. And so that aspect, and again, the ships that I took pictures of when scuba diving at the Vandenberg are underneath the Vandenberg in a different shelf level of that Matthias abyss. Not the same level at the Vandenberg at all. Realistically, however big, as far as feet or meters, that the Vandenberg is, just by itself, the shelf that those naval vessels are sitting on are another shelf below where the Vandenberg is. So, you know, add a couple, extra 100 atmospheric measurements, right? Or something like that. Again, you know, then there's also that issue that when you look up the Vandenberg online, it says that it's only 100 what? How many? 100 something feet to the top of the tower. And how many technical divers, who obviously have more training than I do, because I couldn't do the technical diving because of the math aspects and stuff like that. I pulled myself from that. Same thing with trimix. I knew myself enough to not go into that. For safety. And one particular scuba instructor that I spoke with, he said that he had gone with a group of tech divers and trimix combined, if I'm not mistaken, and they were only able to get to 300 something feet and nowhere near the actual Vandenberg itself. So if a scuba instructor with other more technological trained dive aspects weren't able to get to the top of the tower at 300 something feet, shouldn't that be rectified online in regards to the actual depth of the Vandenberg for safety? Not just the Titanic. Just a suggestion. You know, for safety precautions. That being said, you guys have a good one. Go check out my website. You can find my books that I authored, as well as some other things I've done that you can purchase, hopefully. And comment, like, and share my official YouTube channel. Again, if that's a possibility.